Hello everyone, welcome to the Museum of American Speed. We're here in Lincoln, Nebraska. My name's Tim Matthews and I'm the curator of the museum, and I'm here with a really good friend, not only of Bill Smith, our founder, but Clay Smith and to the museum itself. You know, we're just so happy to have Gary's friendship, and we wanted to get together today and obviously feel very blessed to have the time to do this, but sit down, learn a little bit more about Gary and his passions for racing, but learn a little bit about where he came from. Obviously his dad, Gordon Schroeder, was a very important figure in motor racing and kind of how he got his start. So I guess, Gary, without further ado, welcome to the museum and thanks for being with us.
Oh, thank you. It's always incredible to come here and see what you guys have done with to promote auto racing, the history, the cars, the engines, Model Ts. It doesn't matter what you like. There's something here for you.
Well, you know, and you've helped us so much. I want to thank you for everything you've done for the museum. Your friendship's incredibly important, and we have a lot of your really fabulous items here in the museum. We've got a front drive set up that sits right in front of our Miller room. Of course, we're sitting in front of a really fabulous display here with the Spike Jones midget and a couple other engines and other items you've brought to us to kind of help tell the story of racing history better. So, you know, we couldn't do it without people like you, which is really, really great.
Yeah, well, fortunately, there's a lot of people that have the passion to want to carry on and see it go and preserve, because so much of it, unfortunately, you see it where somebody passes away and the wife didn't like it or the kids don't care, so it ends up going to a yard sale or, worst case, going to the dump or something. So it's great to have a facility like this that'll take it and display it for everybody to enjoy.
Well, and you're such a great guy, like just a super humble guy too, despite being very cultured in the world of racing. I remember when I first met you, it was during a trip out to California, to Burbank, and we were darn near right underneath the Hollywood sign, and we hopped in your Chevy pickup, you know, Chevy pickup just like I drive, nothing fancy. And I thought, well, who's this guy? You know, of course, being a hot rodder, I knew about, you know, Schroeder Steering Boxes, and you dropped me off at the first place to show me some of your collection, and it just blew me away. And then of course we stopped at the second shop, and you know, it was just so much fun, and it really taught me that you're kind of an encyclopedia of racing. And even as a curator of a museum, when I get around you, I get a little nervous because you've got so much knowledge and so much understanding of the history and remembering all the names. It's always just a treasure to talk to you and to learn more about this stuff.
Well, thank you. And it is fortunate, you know, you just sort of get it by osmosis, I guess, from hanging around or having the people hang around growing up with my dad and, you know, Sam Hanks, Lyle Dickey, Johnny Parsons Sr. They were just friends. They just came by and go to the races, watch me run. So it was pretty cool. And you get insight, so they, you know, have a few beers and start telling stories of the good old days and whatever. So it's pretty, it was fun, and you remember a lot of that because it was important to you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know, I kind of idolize your dad, you know, being a hot rodder that loves a side steer on an old Ford, you know, the guy that, you know, kind of built Schroeder Steering Boxes at the beginning. And then when I started researching his history, I thought, holy cow, he was born in Minnesota just like me, which was, you know, really cool. And so he started out life in Minnesota, but he wasn't there very long, was he?
No, the family moved to Santa Ana, and his father was actually a cobbler.
Wow.
So I don't know the interest in racing. He used to ride his horse to the midget races from Santa Ana. I forget the local track where they ran midgets, so he had a horse at that time. So he'd ride his horse to the midget races. And then what got him started in 1938, he and one of his buddies drove the guy's roadster car back to Indianapolis, and the theory was that thought he knew somebody that was on Rex Mays' pit crew, and so they had no passes, they had no deal. They made it to Indy, and they didn't have any money, so they talked to the guy at a gas station there right on 16th Street, and they says, "Can we park here and whatever? We'll like clean out your bays and do whatever if you let us park here and use your restrooms and stuff." So the guy's like, "Yeah, sure." So they went into the track, and they were fortunate. They saw his buddy, and he goes, "No, we don't meet. We got a lot of guys on our crew, but I think Ted Horn might. He might. So let me talk to the Cotton Henning, I believe, was the crew chief then, and he talked to him, and he ended up working on Ted Horn's pit crew for the 500 in
wow.
1938. So that got him some connections. So when he did a good job and everybody liked him, and he was a really good machinist, he graduated from Trade Tech in Los Angeles. And when they got back to California, he interviewed and went to work for Samson Motors. So that was after Millard basically got bankrupt again. And so he and Leo Samson hired Leo Goosen, and so Leo Goosen and Gordon designed Samson midget engine. So we've got a lot of the drawings. You've got one of the engines
Just
here.
right over here. Yeah, I love that engine.
One of the engines, and so a lot of the drawings, Leo's on a lot of them, and Gordon's on a lot of them. He was a really good draftsman, and so that kind of kept things going there. And then unfortunately, they got 2 engines done. Ronnie Householder had one, and Mel Hansen had one. And at one time, the Samson engine had every track record at Gilmore from 1 to 200 laps.
Wow.
And there was an article in the paper about what are the Offie guys going to do about the Samson and whatever. Well, they didn't have to worry about it because they ran okay, but World War II started, so that kind of shot that down. And Riley Brett, who used to be Louis Meyer's chief mechanic in the 30s, actually was the owner of Samson Motors. And Alden Sampson was, I want to say, a trust funder deal, but it was the Sampson radio family. So that was, and he sponsored Louis Meyer, and so that's where the money came from to have Samson Motors and design the midget engine and whatever.
That's interesting, yeah.
And then, so during the World War II, he kind of lost interest. Whatever, Gordon stayed and worked at the shop manufacturing military part stuff, and then he traded or whatever. Riley pretty much gave him, he bought all the patterns and engines and Samson stuff that was available then.
What was the secret? Because, you know, to the casual observer, if you looked at an Offie and looked at a Samson, you might say, oh, they're very similar engines.
Yeah.
But what was the secret to the Samson?
It's similar double overhead cam, but the biggest advantage, so the midget Offie is actually a 3 main bearing crankshaft and 2 valves per cylinder. So whereas the bigger Offie 255, 270 is a 5 main bearing crank and 4 valves per cylinder. But it's a barrel crankcase. I mean, I don't want to get too technical, but it's unusual design, whereas the main webs and everything bolt on the crankshaft, and then you heat the case and drop it in, and then they bolt in. So it's unusual compared to a modern day engine with main caps and a casting. So the Samson's designed like a modern engine.
That's pretty cool.
And it also, Gordon always said that it actually, in 1938, it actually had insert bearings instead of Babbitt. He said it was one of the first engines that he knew of with insert bearings. And it's also a 5 main bearing, 4 valve per cylinder like the big engine. So
has all the good stuff, yeah.
So we were in the 60s, he was kind of, midget racing started to get more popular again. So we thought about the Samson always sat in a table in the office at the shop, and there was a fellow named Axtell who actually built world's first flow bench. So we got partnered with Axtell, and we're working at airflow design and stuff. And so we had a Offie block and the Samson, and so we set up fixtures and stuff and went over to Axtell's. And the Samson flowed 3 times as much air on the intake and 4 or 5 times as much on the exhaust compared to the Offie. The ports were raised a little bit. It was, you know, so it was a monster compared to that. And then with the 5 main bearing crank, you could put up so much more horsepower, to the point where Mel Hansen actually supercharged his, put a blower on it, and put it in a stretched midget, and ran it as a sprint car.
Oh, jeez.
And yeah, so
that's saying something.
And due to the superior flow on the exhaust, excuse me, my nose is running a little bit. Superior flow on the exhaust, the noise it makes is really loud. It's
Sounds like music, I'm
yeah,
sure.
it sounds like music. So it's pretty unique. As a matter of fact, there's a great story. So Mel Hansen was at one of the big tracks, and it was a horse track, and he was out qualifying, and he said he came around his first lap, and the stands were pretty full, and he came around the second lap, and the stands were empty. And he's like, well, whatever. And the thing made such a racket that it set up a harmonic that it vibrated all the bird crap out of out of the rafters and was raining down.
That's hilarious. I thought they were going for earplugs.
Yeah,
but
no, on the spectators. So it was, that was one of the stories, and I've heard it from more than one person. So I imagine it's true.
That is
so
really
it's
funny.
it's.
Well, kind of rewinding a little bit, I think it may be important to younger viewers out there. Your dad obviously was a very skilled technical person. He knew his way around machining and had a real talent for it. But I think to people out there to kind of understand that, I think nowadays you come out of school and you're ready to light the world on fire, and you expect a big job with lots of benefits and all this. In those days, you really you were very humble. It's like, yes, I will sweep the floor to get an opportunity. And it's not the first story I've heard like that with people that come to the museum that were very successful in life, not being humble enough to know that I've got to do the hard work first, and I'm going to earn my keep that way. And that's kind of what happened with your dad. People started kind of noticing that not only was he a hard worker, but he had some real talent. When do you think the first time was that somebody noticed that?
Well, I think when he got to be on Ted Horn's pit crew and just his knowledge of engine and engineering. I mean, he was really good sort of intuitive engineer. He could design something in his head and then draw it. So new gear layouts, shaft design. I mean, we found in the sort of family archives when he went to Trade Tech, the final for the drafting class was a draw transmission.
Jeez.
It's like, and so I'm quizzing him on it, and it's like, well, how long did it take you to do this? Oh, it was just a final, it was a class.
Wow.
And I said, I'm looking like, well, how many people did it? Well, everybody in the class did it. He says, I finished first, just because it was quicker, but it was pretty interesting, just to see, and I'm looking at it like, how did you?
It's like a Da Vinci drawing.
Yeah, pretty much. It's different.
Oh, man.
Kind of see what the technical expertise was then, and what you could do. Yeah, compared to what now.
My friend, his Toyota started making a ticking noise. He knew it was a lifter. He goes in to get the lifter replaced. They say, we don't really do that anymore.
Yeah.
We just swap the engine out, and somebody else will will scrap that engine. It's like, what? Nobody replaces lifters anymore? It's like, it just really kind of strikes you, and what a great time that was. A lot of people kind of call it the golden age, especially right around World War II, where people's technical knowledge was really blossoming because we needed that. We needed people that knew how to work on stuff. So during the war, your dad was kind of involved in that too, because racing had kind of come to a halt a little bit.
Yeah, racing was completely stopped.
Yeah.
So they've, the war effort, and Sampson Motors pretty much just scrapped everything. And Eldon Sampson had lost interest in, I don't know if there was a falling out there or whatever, but he moved on after the war. Okay. And that's how Gordon ended up with all the Sampson stuff.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Tell me, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, well then, so after that, because he ended up, he had two midgets that he built during the war, or after the war. This one, the one behind us, was actually belonged to, and I apologize, I forget who it was, but it was a flat tail, more upright nose, and as the war was winding down, they updated it and put the headrest on it and put a more of a conventional nose, V860 powered, and he ran it at the first, he decided he was headed for sale, and so they ran it at the first race at Saugus Speedway after World War II, and I think he wanted $1,000 for it, and the first race they ran pretty well, and ended up making like $800. So he decided, well, I'll just keep it. It's
the car earned its keep.
The car earned its keep. It's a good car. It works. I'll keep it. So
And we've been looking for a tow rig for this thing. What would have he towed this trailer with?
He had a Mercury station wagon.
Oh, that's kind of like a Woody, was
Yeah,
it?
Woody wagon
Oh,
in
nice.
those days, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Which was pretty much what everybody had. That
Oh,
was,
yeah. If you were in California and you needed a tow rig,
Yeah.
Woody, man,
And
that's
that
cool.
was, and I forget one of the exhaust companies, if you look at any of the old Gilmore Stadium deal, and because it was hot and they'd leave the rear window open. Well, obviously, if anybody's ever had a station wagon, it sucks the exhaust in. So there was a company there, and they made exhaust extensions that went up like a semi truck that went up and up the back and put the exhaust out above like at the roof line.
Oh,
so it didn't
that's
suck
fun.
in. And then but the long pipe, it made the flathead sound pretty good. So they did a couple for a push car or something at Gilmore, and then they said they had them lined up around the corner to do this modification on the wagon exhaust.
Well, that's fun. So not only do we need to find a Mercury wagon, we need to get the big long pipes
Yeah, the
on
long
it.
pipes on it.
Oh man,
Yeah,
that's
forget
fun.
it.
Well, that's pretty cool. So, did your dad ever say what exactly types of parts he was making for the war effort during the war years?
No, not really. I think the Samson Motors kind of specialized in gear cutting and stuff, so I think they did. And they're obviously being in Los Angeles, there was a lot of aircraft manufacturers around.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they did subcontract work and whatever for that. They never got into, I'm sure never mentioned, but I doubt they got into any artillery or military armament or anything, but mainly just engine parts and or
Sure.
whatever for the aircraft.
Your dad would have been about 35, 36 during the war years, or what age would have he been?
Yeah, probably right around there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wonder, I'm so interested in World War II era stuff, and so as a machinist, was he likely to be drafted at that time, or was he kind of too old for the draft?
I think he was just a little old, and then being a machinist and working at a plant for the war effort.
They wanted to keep those
they wanted
guys
to keep
doing
them
what they
there.
were
Yeah,
doing.
what they were doing.
That's really interesting. So at that time, he hadn't really invented the steering quick release yet, or the steering box itself. That all kind of came after the war.
Yeah, and the quick release was late deal. So the quick release started. Oh, it had to have been 70, early or late 60s, early 70s, because we went to it was one of because the early NASCAR cars, they used a plastic Ford steering wheel that they dipped in rubber, and they were bolted onto a Ford steering column.
Oh boy.
So, and one of the drivers got hurt pretty bad, and they couldn't get the steering off. They had a real struggle getting them out, and I think he got burned and whatever. I don't remember the details. So we knew some friends that were involved in NASCAR. NASCAR was wanted to come up with a way to get the steering wheels off, and it was meant as a safety device, not something that you take the wheel on and off every time you get in and out of the car. So, but obviously that's changed now, and so I actually tagged along, and we went out. Gordon and myself went out to Riverside, met with NASCAR, and they gave us one of the early wheels. Like, this is what it needs to have, this much dish, this diameter, and this is the grip size. And it was like a plastic, which everybody's seen, the old Ford wheel dipped in rubber. And so he came up with the spline and the quick release, and that was originally just a ball lock pin that you could just pull it and slide it off. We made a little spline coupler that went on top of the column, and we made those, and they were mandatory in NASCAR forever, for a long time. And that started, like I said, I don't remember exactly the year, but it was early 70s after the NASCAR driver got hurt. So then that kind of spread, because open wheel cars that wasn't a requirement then. And shortly after that, then open wheel had the same thing, and the cockpit started getting smaller with the roll cages. It made it tougher. So, and we developed those, or he developed those, and then I actually did the first, because he was pretty much out of the business by the 80s. I was running the shop and everything, so I designed the squeeze type quick release that we sold and did for a lot of years.
Oh boy. And if any of you out there have interacted with a quick release, you'll know there are good ones. I've had a Schroeder quick release, and then there are kind of the bad ones. There's like clunk, clunk.
There's a lot of, everybody, and unfortunately nowadays that's kind of the deal. Everybody Xeroxes something, but unless you hold the aircraft tolerances or something, especially on gear splines or whatever, because the gear's like a thread. If you're a thousandths off on the diameter, pitch diameter of the measurement, it's 3,000 slop.
Oh, boy.
It's a 3-to-1 ratio as far as what, so everything's got, all the tolerances need to be exceedingly tight.
Oh boy, that's fascinating stuff. And when did the steering box happen? Because that happened before the quick release. What year would have that been?
So it was kind of an odd story in that he built cars in the late 40s, early 50s. And when he'd built cars, through his, he didn't have Samson, he was gone from Samson Motors by then. He and Emil Diet were partners once. He'd partnered with a couple of other more fabricators, and he was a machinist side. And when he'd build the steering boxes for the cars he was building, well, when you do that, it's just as easy to build 10 of something as it is 1 or 2. So he'd build like 10 steering boxes at a time, and then he sold, the majority of them went to Kuzma. And so most of the Kuzma cars had Schroeder steerings in it, and then a few of the other builders around might have got them now and then. And so that was it. It wasn't a production. It was just steel, and you could make a few little extra bucks selling them.
Sure.
So the steering box didn't get involved until early 60s, 61, 62. So at that time, Don Edmonds, Jim Colbert of CAE, Edmonds Auto Research, were building midgets and starting to mass produce cars again. And they were still trying to find like Franklin steerings and stuff, and you couldn't find them. And it was a poor design for a race car because the gears were put on with a Woodruff key, so there were always failures where the gears and arms were connected to the cross shaft and everything. So through this, Edmonds and Colbert and stuff knew he was involved in racing, and were old enough to remember him building the steering boxes in the 40s and early 50s. They called one afternoon at the shop and said, you know, we really need steerings, and you know, what would you do? And so he went home and designed a steering box. And in like an afternoon, maybe 2 afternoons, he came in the following couple days. We built the patterns at the shop. I was obviously really young then, but I was still at the shop, and made a few. And he's like, yeah, we'll make, I don't know, the novelty wore off here, but we manufactured them all the way up till 2015.
Unbelievable.
And then
I remember walking in the shop with Clay Smith and you as it was kind of cleared out, you know, and Clay said, boy, you know, I can't believe seeing the building this way. He remembered it when it was bustling, and you were obviously extremely busy, and you know, I'm sure over the years, you know, how many steering boxes would you figure you produced?
Well,
did you ever count?
Yeah, because every steering box had a serial number on it, and it was all handwritten on a sheet, the dimensions and what they were and who it was sold to and whatever. And I've got all those in boxes, so I can look back in 1960 whatever who bought this, whether it was Speedy Bill used to have them in his catalog. We sold them to Speedy, and actually that was long enough ago. It was before UPS. And so we did have to ship everything Greyhound. So I'd box them up and then take them down to the Greyhound station in Burbank, or actually the Greyhound, the shop was in Burbank, the Greyhound station was in Toluca in North Hollywood. And then Clay would pick them up when they tried here and rebox them or relabel them and send them off to wherever the customer was.
Oh, that's fun.
So yeah, so that was kind of interesting.
I'm stuck between 2 questions I want to ask you. One's kind of maybe the first one I'll start with, but then I want to circle back to Speedy Bill, because obviously, you know, our history and everything, it's just so fascinating to me how Bill used to interact with his folks that he was purchasing from. But first, you know, kind of your life growing up with a father that was involved with racing. You know, I know my own son, you know, who's in 5th grade now, you know, he hangs out at the museum with me all the time, and I try not to force him, you know, like, hey, this is cool, you should like this. I try to just let him kind of like it on his own, because you know, my hope obviously is that he'll want to go build something someday and have an old car. But for you, how was it with your dad? Was he, you know, like, come to the shop, I'm going to teach you exactly what I'm doing, or did he kind of
no,
let you learn
it was totally hands off. He was, by that time, he was more interested in horses. I grew up around horses.
Oh, is that right? Wow.
We rode several times a month around. We were adjacent to Griffith Park, so there's a lot of bridle trails there. We belonged to several horse groups where we'd trailer like once a month, either national parks or someplace, and ride a lot. And I actually worked at a pack station one summer.
Oh, wow.
With mules and
I
stuff.
did not
So I
know
had
that. That's fascinating.
So I had a little different experience with that. And the racing, after he had a really tough run in the early 50s, Bobby Ball, who drove the IndyCar for him, was driving. They were staying at the house in Burbank, and Bobby went and ran a midget for somebody and got hurt. And my mom was an RN, and she went down to the hospital, and he was unconscious. But he didn't, she said it looked like he fell off a bicycle. He didn't have a mark on him. There was he had a skinned knee, and they never regained consciousness. They put a feeding tube in him. He was breathing on his own. And they finally, he was from Phoenix, and they transformed him to Phoenix, and he lived for over a year. And he finally passed away, and he died of appendicitis.
Oh my gosh.
His appendix burst, but he never regained consciousness.
Oh.
So
Had
that
he
was,
been awake, he could have said, "Boy, I've got this pain."
Yeah.
Oh, what a heartbreak.
And then, so that was really tough, and because Bobby drove in the IndyCar for him and everything. And then Rex Mays was staying with him at Del Mar, and Rex got killed at Del Mar. And so that was kind of, maybe there's racing.
Boy, you know.
Yeah, so that was tough. So, and by that time he was starting to do more specialized machine work, and he was designing specialized machinery for a bearing company and for General Controls, which was in the Burbank area too. He designed fixtures and drill jigs for them and stuff. Wow. And so that, we still went to races and were involved in all the Parsons and Sam Hanks and, you know, any of the local drivers or whatever had stopped by that he knew, but they were just friends. We weren't really involved. We'd go to the races, but that was it.
Sure.
And so we didn't really get involved much with it again until the steering boxes started again. Sure. You know, in the early. So that was early or mid 50s, and then in the early 60s they started doing the steering boxes. So that got more involvement in racing because you're dealing with Edmonds Sea, and then started to ship stuff back east in Stanton. And all we made manual, all the steerings, the 10,000 steerings we made majority were manual steerings. We did make a few power steerings, but we built them from scratch, so they were really expensive to build. And nothing wrong with it, but all the other manufacturers, Lee and Profile and whatever, they take a GM steering box and put it in a prom dress, you know. Sure. So they make, you know, which is perfect because you're getting $1,000 worth of parts that you can buy at a junkyard, and there's nothing wrong with them. I mean, that's the thing. Sure. Yeah, the spool valve, the ball screw, and all that. So, so we didn't really. That wasn't Gordon's thing. He wanted to design. You know, it had to be his design. I'm not going to redo somebody else's. So we made a few of them, and that was about it. So we just stuck with the manuals, and then steering boxes, and then we did. Had a good market. We made them for drag boats also.
Oh, is that
so
right?
Curtis, so Frank Curtis's son Arlen never really got the car gene, but he was big into boats. So he built the fastest drag boats on the planet. At that time, Eddie Hill, that had the world record at 230 miles an hour to boat, were all Curtis craft boats, and we made the steering boxes for Arlen for his boats.
That's really cool. You know, you talk about, you know, losing friends in that racing world, and you know, we were sitting not far from here with Alice Hanks, Sam Hanks' wife, and you know, it was really interesting when she talked about that lifestyle, that world. You know, you'd hear about a good friend, and it was a tight fraternity of people. You know, you'd eat together, you'd go, you know, have parties together, and you'd live together a lot of times. And when you lost a close friend, it was really a game changer. And you know, Alice would say, you know, when we lost a friend, you know, we would kind of be sad about it, but then we'd never mention it again because you had to kind of get on to the next race. And you know, I can't imagine that world and being so tight knit. And then it was a dangerous world back then.
I mean, it was, and it was a different world. I mean, you know, you hate to say you're don't appreciate it or don't life or whatever, but that was just how it was. They didn't, you know, it's. I hate to see in modern racing when they stop a race when somebody gets killed or whatever, because it starts a precedence. I mean, how many people have been killed, and you know, everybody's sad. The race is done in their honor, whatever. They knew, you know, the circumstances going in, but
for sure.
Yeah, very few died of old age. You
A
know?
risky
Yeah.
business for
Yeah.
sure. And it was kind of maybe a different mentality. You know, you grew up around the war years where there were so many ways to get
Yeah.
into trouble
Yeah.
and do dangerous things. If you were used to jumping out of you know, airplanes
Yeah.
during World War II, a race car probably felt okay.
Yeah.
But you know, I just find that time fascinating. And
Mm-hmm.
so your dad, you know, having built and interacted with so many race teams, did he ever get behind the wheel as a race driver, or
No,
was that kind of
that
there was a
no,
just
never tried, never had any passion to. He liked the design side of things and maybe coming up with something different or a better. He was the first one. He built front brakes on a midget.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, they were drum brakes that he adapted. They built a lot of it, and then they adapted, I think, a Willys brake shoe or something, and he makes so. Because the tracks, you ran the cars were run so different then. We ran them a lot straighter, and there was several pavement tracks around. So they were first sold as Gordon Schroeder front brakes, and then he'd put anybody's name on them if they bought enough of them. So Bell Auto Parts, he and Roy Richter were good friends, so a lot of them were sold through Bell Auto Parts.
Yeah, he was the powerhouse back
Yeah,
then.
yeah,
For
Roy Richter.
he was getting parts sold for
Yeah.
sure. And then Torsion Bars became a big part of your world. And tell me how that all got started.
Oh, well, that started, so steering boxes, so I was getting old enough, and then a friend, Jim Naylor in Ventura Raceway, started running a weekly show with 3/4 midgets, and I had a friend that was running, and from Burbank, and it's like, wow, these are really cool, a lot of fun, and was a cost-effective way to race.
Sure.
So I finally sort of finagled my way and got a chassis, and then got a car put together. And actually, Wayne Ewing, who's famous for building the Watson bodies and stuff, was hanging around the shop doing some restoration work on some stuff, and so he got sort of sparked. And so Wayne was my crew chief. We built. He did a lot of work on the car, and we'd go to the races and run. So that kind of got me started in it. Well, the torsion bars, there were several builders available, but the 3/4 midgets, they were a little narrower on the front, so we couldn't get stuff. So I figured out, and we had the equipment with the gear cutting equipment and whatever. And then Gordon gave me some advice because he just built very few. He actually built some torsion bars for the Curtis house cars in the 50s and whatever, and then Curtis said they were too expensive or whatever, so he sold all the normal cars came with Brand X, whoever, I don't know who made them in those days. So you got some advice from maybe material and heat treats and from Gordon and some other engineers around, and so I started making my own bars for my own cars and stuff. And so then again, like steering boxes, it's like, well, I knew these guys and make a couple extra, so I started selling extras and whatever. And that time, there was midget racing was pretty popular there, and Thursday Night Thunder was just going. So we started selling extras to people, and I went, wow, these work really good. They're better than the cars. Just feels better, and it's faster, and whatever. And then what really put us on the map, I was delivering. We went to the Copper World, and I was delivering some parts to one of the, probably Rick Stewart or whatever in Phoenix, one of our customers, and built the chassis I used to race. And Larry Howard was running there, which Larry Howard was famous, won Turkey Nights how many times and all that. And I was carrying some bars, and he goes, oh man, we're struggling. I need to have stiffer bar, or I need something. And I said, well, I just brought him over for his stock. I'm sure I'll send him some or something. So put these in. Well, he put them in, and the car woke up and was better. They were 4/10 faster, and he goes, wow, these are really good. So he was really good about spreading the word, like, hey, you should try Schroeder's torsion bars and stuff. They seem to work a little better. And then what really changed things, so that was when Challenger got started, so Challenger chassis. And well, they wanted, because at that time all the midget torsion bars and everything, Edmunds, were all 7/8 spline. Well, they wanted A, to update, and B, to make sure that if you bought one of their cars, you didn't put old bars or stuff in it, because then it's such a, so all the Challenger midgets were 1-inch spline torsion bars. So they were like, can you build 1-inch spline bars? I can build anything you want, you know. So we started building, obviously Challenger became really popular, and so we built all the bars for them. And then again, Larry Howard ran the Challenger for a long time and whatever, so that just kind of steamrolled. And then We started the sprint car side of things. We'd actually partnered with MPD, Jeff Gordon's dad,
Sure.
or stepfather, and we built stuff for them that they distributed the sprint car bars and
That's
whatever. And then we got heavily involved with NASCAR through Jeff.
Oh, sure.
So we built special bars for Jeff for when he was running the pavement cars in Winchester and all that. And when Jeff transferred over to NASCAR, John's really good mechanically and whatever, and he's looking at these bars and the splines are kind of twisted on them, and he was with Ray, and John's like, well, these are all look terrible. What's and Ray's like, no, that's what we run. He goes, I got a guy you need to talk to. So they sent us, this is what we need, this is what we're looking for and stuff. So we made some parts for them and they tested them, and then we were one of the first ones to come up with time spline. At that time, bars were just splined. So timing means that if you put arms on them, everything's parallel. So if you change bars, you can just slide the arms off, put a heavier, softer bar in, and just slide the arms back on. You don't have to reset the chassis. You don't have to do anything. So we were one of the first ones to do that. So guys could make a bar change, whereas before, with the other bars that were available, you had to reset everything because the arms wouldn't end up in the same place, so you're redoing the length. So that was a deal, and thanks Ray Evernham, he was, we built stuff for him, and he's like, oh, these are great, and I said, well, I'll just build them for you. And Ray was, I don't mind, tell everybody where we did. So at that time, and I think it was like over 10 years in a row, we had bars on every car in the Daytona 500.
I read that and I thought, wow, what an achievement. That's really something.
And then as the cars changed, at that time they were 1.25 inch spline. Actually, the first ones were 1 inch spline, I believe. Then they went to 1.25 inch spline. And then as the NASCAR cars changed and the aero packages changed, aero became a lot more critical, and the bigger bars to keep the left front down for aero deal. So we were the first ones, and we started making 1.5 inch spline bars so we could get a little more spring rate in the front. And then, the crew chiefs, mechanics, we need more. So then we were at 1.75 inch, then we were 2 inch. Then, the last series of bars we made were like 2.75 inch spline and like this big around, and incredible spring rates. And so that was a lot of fun, just working with the NASCAR guys. And in those days, it was incredible. We were doing some stuff with Jeff and Ray, and he wanted to try something because they had a test. That time they tested pretty much every day of the year, and I called. We had some stuff we had to ship overnight, and I called to leave a message at Ray's shop at Hendrick on Christmas Eve, and he answers the phone. It's like, well, whatever. Well, I shipped your stuff today. It'll be there tomorrow, day after Christmas, so.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, so.
Well, one thing's for sure, the Schroeder name is kind of synonymous with high quality. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say they had a Schroeder part that was poor quality. It's always been, that was kind of the pinnacle. And how did you keep that level of quality up? And was it hard? A lot of times I have this mentality that, gosh darn it, if something's going to be done right, I have to do it myself. But obviously you don't have torsion bars in every car in the Daytona 500 without some good help on your team. Was it hard to kind of get your crew to kind of understand the goal? Or tell me a little bit about that.
We didn't, it wasn't so much, you got to crank out this many parts. It's like, if you have any questions, or, I fortunately had some really good employees and a good shop foreman, and it's like, if there's any issues or you think there's a problem, we're not going to be mad. Just let us know. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't fit, or something's changing. And it's like, I used to tell them, it's like, we can make thousands of good parts, and nobody cares, but you make one bad one and everybody's going to know about it. So
that's the truth.
That's what we got to do. So we were fortunate, that way, and had good, because a lot of it's a feel deal, and you'd catch stuff, at the peak of the business, and before I sold it, we were making over 20,000 torsion bars a year.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
and as a guy on the front lines, I worked
Yeah.
in the call center here at Speedway Motors for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I always knew when we sent out a Schroeder part, I wasn't going to get a call back.
Yeah.
And that was always a good feeling.
yeah.
And they were only, I got to say, there's maybe a handful of manufacturers that you knew that you could send something out,
Yeah.
and you're never going to hear from that customer again until they need a new one.
Yeah.
And, so that was always a great feeling. And I think a real feather in the cap for what you did, and to be able to take what your dad kind of built, but then even make it better. And
Yeah.
I'm sure when he looked at the torsion bar side of things and what you were doing, he had to have been awful proud.
He was, yeah.
You talk a little bit about your dad and how proud, I'm sure he was, but very, very similar to Bill. When I talk to Bill's sons, Clay and Jason, Craig and Clay, they'll say the same thing. It took an awful lot for Bill to say good job, and your dad
Yeah.
was kind of the same way.
Oh yeah. You didn't get many attaboys or whatever. Just like that'll do, or whatever. That was it. And always had to be working,
For sure.
That's it. That's it. So,
Yeah,
but-
if they tell you good job, it might you'll take your foot off the gas.
Yeah,
or something.
and it's kind of, but it goes back to like, I don't know, the racing thing. Like I said, people getting hurt or killed or whatever. That's just how it was, and
Sure.
you should be hard workers. That's that's how it should be. You shouldn't get an attaboy. This is what you're supposed to do.
For sure.
So.
Yeah, I remember in school kind of having the same thing. I'd draw a picture, bring it home to my dad. Dad, isn't this great? And he'd say, that's really awful. The car doesn't look anything like it's supposed to. So then you'd try harder and try harder. And before you know it, all the kids in school are saying, you're really good at art. It's like, well, I wasn't born this way. It's because
Yeah.
my dad was,
Yeah.
kind of that
Yeah.
way. I think fathers like that really know how to push the right buttons.
Yeah.
It doesn't always feel great at the time,
Yeah.
but you look back on it and kind
Yeah.
of think, wow, maybe that helped.
Yeah, and he was, machining wise and stuff. He was really, like he used to tell me I'd make a part on a lathe. He goes, it doesn't take 2 minutes longer to take a file and radius the corners and make sure there's no sharp edges and there's no cutting tool lines. There's nothing, it's like, yeah, you're right. And you look at this part and this part, it looks like it should take twice as much, but in reality it takes 10% more time to make a really quality part as it does just an average part.
For sure.
So,
with Bill kind of being in business since '52, did he originally talk to your dad on parts, or was that always you that he interacted
no,
with?
he'd talk to Gordon and the
Yeah.
steering boxes and stuff especially.
Sure.
I mean, yeah.
And Bill wasn't always easy to get along with either, because I know he never liked selling from an empty wagon. He always liked having a lot of inventory. And do you have any good stories about those days when Bill would call?
Oh yeah, well he was sure we were selling steering boxes all, because sometimes we'd get a little behind or we'd get slow or something. So Bill, as a matter of fact, I think I shared it with Clay. We were cleaning up when we moved the shop. I found an old archive, and it was a picture it was copy of Bill's catalog with the Schroeder steerings in it. It's like, how come I can never get any of these and all my competitors seem to have them in stock? What's wrong with you, or don't you like us or whatever, or something speedy, and it's like, hey, no, we're just slow with we're consistent. We're slow with everybody, Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
And that sounds like Bill, yeah.
Yeah. So that was, and Speedy, I was fortunate. I mean, he used to call. Obviously, he would interact. And then he and my mom bonded because my mom had an incredible race car toy collection. So they used to, whenever Bill was in town, they'd wheel and deal and trade and stuff. So that's how I kind of actually met them through that. Was they'd come to the house and Joyce, and they'd buy and sell trade model race cars or toy race cars and stuff.
That's cool. I love the old adage that behind every great guy there's an equally great or greater gal. And tell me a little bit about your mom. She was a nurse and a toy collector.
Yeah.
What else could you say about her? She seemed like a pretty amazing lady.
She was, pretty amazing. You knew right where you stood. Yeah, similar to Joyce. Maybe
Sure.
Carmen was a little more outgoing with letting you know where you stood, but it's funny. I mean, she ran the office and Gordon was a machinist side of things and design stuff, and Carmen would do the paperwork and make sure there was checks in there. I mean, one of the stories, he was not a paperwork or the guy to the point where when I was born, excuse me.
No, it's okay.
He took it was payroll day, so he took the checkbook to the hospital.
Oh, jeez. So she's about to give birth and signing all the checks.
Yeah, so she had to fill out the checkbook because that wasn't his thing. So yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
She still bitched about it. Yeah, that was fun. So.
Well, that's pretty cool. And
Yeah.
for you, were you the only child then?
No, I've got a brother.
You have a brother?
I
Oh
have a
boy,
brother,
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, so Alan, but there's 7 years between us, so it's
Sure.
like 2 generations. And he never got, well, he liked it. He never got the driving or racing bug. He was, at that time, computers were just coming in, and
Sure.
he got, and videos. He was one of the first guys to shoot videos.
Wow.
At deal. So he developed a camera, or didn't develop, but he got a video camera, and he'd come and shoot videos of the races in the early 80s, which was
that is
really
cool.
unusual. And then it expanded, and he moved to Colorado, and he was one of the first guys they actually shot ski videos at Vail. It was the Summit Video Works.
That's
and
cool.
So, yeah, and in those days, you know, we all look at the small cameras and everything. Now, I mean, I think the camera was like 20 pounds. You know, it was the big, like a professional. And that was all you could get in those days. And then the backpack weighed like another 30 pounds. So he'd have to ski with all that stuff. And they'd take videos of all the heroes, you know, and stuff, and sell them at Vail and Breckenridge or whatever. And then through that, he did stuff for TV stations and whatever. They'd hire him, and he'd go up in the helicopters and shoot videos and stuff. And he worked for a really high-end company in Colorado called Listen Up that does the huge installs within in-home theater systems and stuff. And through that connection, when the Pepsi Center first opened, he was on the ground floor at that when they built it. So he helped lay out all the video and audio stuff in the Pepsi Center, and he worked there until about 3-4 years ago.
Wow.
And so it was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So if you saw it or heard it in the Pepsi Center, it was his responsibility.
Wow, that's cool. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah, just different.
Different world, but
and he had one of the great lines when the lights went out at the Super Bowl. I'm sure we remember that. I called him, you know, I said, I bet you're glad you're not there. And I said, else is gonna roll on that one? He goes, yeah, that's why I never wear a tie to work, because that way nobody figures I'm in charge.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it didn't take me long walking through your place to understand your garage doesn't quite look like a typical restoration garage, but it's not just a racer's garage either. It's this crazy, cool combination of history and modern stuff. You've got hot rod projects, you've got neat sports cars. I mean, you've got the automotive passion through and through. And how did that love of history kind of come into your world? Do you remember when that all first started?
Yeah, well, I always grew up, I mean, when, you know, Sam Hanks comes around, Johnny Parsons or Myron Stevens, or, I mean, one of the great stories I remember, just because Myron Stevens, I don't know, Myron was the chief fabricator for Miller. So he built all the Millers.
All those beautiful
the beautiful
cars.
The incredible cars. And it was at one of the Gilmore parties that my mom used to put on, and I was building a set of headers for my midget. So I'm like down, and he came to town early, and his friend, and so I'm welding up headers, and then Myron's like standing around, and he's like, yeah, when I went to first set of headers, or first few sets of headers I built for Miller, used to take me 3 weeks.
Whoa.
And I went, I just kind of did like, what? You're like the hero fabricator. And then all of a sudden he goes, well, I had to make them out of flat stock.
Oh, jeez.
And, okay, now I understand.
You're a magician,
And then if you look at him, he says, well, yeah, and I got it down so I could make a set in like 10 days. And he said, and if you look at a real set of Miller headers, they're tapered as they come out of the exhaust port, and there's seams down both sides, because what he did, they made cast iron slapping blocks. So he'd have to cut the sheet metal out to that shape, then they'd hammer it over there and trim it at the center line and do the top and bottom, and then have to weld it all together. To the point, even the exhaust pipes. He said, yeah, the 4-inch exhaust pipe, that had to be made out of flat stock too. He said, I had a egg dolly on a long solid bar that we'd start rolling it and wrap it around.
Wow.
You know, it's like, no wonder you guys didn't put roll bars on anything.
No kidding.
You
Yeah,
want to
could
bend
you
this, you're
imagine?
going to pay.
Oh
Yeah.
man, that makes header fabrication today
Oh
feel
yeah,
like
yeah.
I'm like a clown if I can't figure it out, right?
Yeah, you just like seem like, you know, and then you start looking at all the other stuff they did. It was just, yeah, it was a little different. We got spoiled, though, thanks to Speedway Motors, whatever. You just dial up the phone and it's there in a couple days, and
Yeah, for
I
sure.
can bolt it on.
And your whole question is do I get it chromed or do I have it ceramic coated? Or,
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
way easy nowadays.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine, you know, working in your shop as a young guy and then having somebody like that stop over and just having that incredible opportunity to meet those people that were
Yeah.
part of that world. And, you know, now, you know, when we go through the Miller room and we look at Miller stuff, it just seems like a completely other planet that stuff
Yeah.
happened on. You know, it's just so far, it's kind of disconnected from what we know as modern racing, and but you look to those times with a lot of admiration, and so I guess that answers the question. I mean, how do you not get inspired by those people? When
Yeah,
you get
they
to
were,
meet them?
they were just so interesting, and they weren't those guys that caliber person. I mean, Myron was really a lead guy, but they were kind of quiet. Leo Goosen was a really just laid back, quiet guy.
And not a big car enthusiast, right?
No, he was, yeah, not really. And one of the things I remembered, he used to come to the Gilmore parties, and I was good friends with like Gordon and stuff, and I'd shake hands with him, and it was like shaking hands with a woman or something.
It was very soft.
It was
touch.
very soft and supple hands, and I'm like, yeah, it's like, wow. And then it's like, well, all he's done is push a pencil around. Nothing really well, but it's, you know, when you're used to shaking hands with machinists or mechanics or whatever, it's just a different feel. But Leo,
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the Leonardo da Vinci of you know, mechanical drawing. I mean, I still look at a Goosen drawing, and I just almost want to cry. It's just so beautiful. And, yeah, it's that's really cool to have crossed paths with people like that, and that obviously fuels your passion. And you've restored a number of cars, and tell me a little bit about some of them, especially the Blakely, which is a really cool car.
Yeah, so Gordon built he built two cars. He built one. He was partnered with Emil Deed in the late '40s, and Ray Brady was a sponsor, and it wasn't real successful. I think they had engine issues. I think it had a Sparks Thorn 6 initially in it, which didn't run very well, and I think they missed the show. I don't even remember. He didn't really even like to talk, but it was an absolutely gorgeous car. It looked like a Formula One car more. It had the tail with the headrest. It was a rounded tail, but it didn't have a headrest on it. It just started like that with a big radius down the center. It was usual, and nobody ever really knew what happened to that car. And then early 50s, he got an order to build two Indy cars. So one became the Brown Motor Car Company. It was for the wheel guy, and whatever.
Oh, wow. That's right.
Dayton Wheel, Walther, for George Walther. So,
Okay, sure.
Or George Walther ended up with it afterwards, but it was a Brown Motor Company. And then that's when he built the Blakely car. So he built the two side by side, basically. They finished the Brown Motor car, that went on, and then he was finishing the Blakely car, and that was a little bit behind. So my mom remembers him working on it, that he just had a mattress in the shop, and he'd work on it till couldn't sleep, he'd go sleep for a while, and then come back and work on it, to the point that they didn't even make it the first weekend of qualifying at Deal. They loaded it up and went to Indy and made it for second week, and Bobby qualified fourth or fifth fastest overall, but because he was second weekend, he had to start pretty far back. And then it was a good run for him. They ended up fifth in the 500, and so that was
amazing.
That was a good run. And the car's really unusual is the chassis bolts together. It's not a tube frame car. So there's aluminum formed frame rails that are riveted together. So you've got an aluminum box section, and then there's magnesium castings that bolt those two together that the suspension goes off of, and the motor plate and the rear suspension all go off these castings that are bolted to this frame.
Wow.
I was kidding, going, it's like it would have been a whole lot easier if you just learned how to weld. You know, but so it's a really unique piece, and it's
Sophisticated.
It's really sophisticated, and it's kind of like a modular car because you could slide stuff around before you mounted them to the rails. And there's a lot of similarities to the Maseratis, which he worked on with Ted Horn in '38. So that was with a parallel bar suspension, torsion bar suspension, and the duplex steering and whatever. So I'm sure he took some kind of design ideas, concepts from the Maserati, and incorporated that into the Blakely car and the Brown car.
That's cool. And yeah, just, you know, the guy just strikes me as a sponge. He was probably just soaking this stuff up and so passionate about it. And do you still have the Blakely car?
Yeah,
That's a beautiful car.
We were actually, it was found, Bobby Ball's son, Jeff Ball, found a lot of the remains of it in Colorado in the 70s. And so it was the tanks, the seats, the cowl frame, some of the rails, you know, just it had been shade cut up, and some of the suspension was gone. And George Walther had the Brown car, and then I guess he'd bought, after the Blakely car retired, he got some of the parts off of it or something. So anyway, the stuff ended up in his warehouse in Dayton, Ohio. So, and George was kind of a curmudgeon and whatever, to the point where my dad, because we had quite a few of the parts, he went back to see George and like, I'd like to buy them or let me borrow them so I can copy them, whatever. And George, I don't, you know, whatever. So finally, when he passed away, I was able to contact his son and went back and was able to purchase the parts. So that gave us a pretty good run at some of the spindles and the hubs and uprights that would have been really hard to duplicate, because they were custom-made forgings and stuff that, you know, and I know how hard it was to get stuff done then, and I go, how did you get this stuff done? And he goes, well, I did a drawing and I sent it down to Pacific Forge, and a week later they gave me 8 of them, and they were $10 a piece or something. You know? And I mean, so he designed. So go back a little bit as far as getting stuff made outside, and they bought the engine, Samson's deal in 1930, in the mid-30s, they bought the wreck of the Stutz Blackhawk. So that had the 16-cylinder Miller.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That's
they had
a cool
the 16-cylinder Miller in it. And so they got that to California, and at Samson Motors, they built the Samson Motor Special with a Stutz Blackhawk engine in it.
Sophisticated engine.
Oh yeah, well, it's 2 supercharged Millers on a common crankcase. So there's 2 crankshafts and then a gear drive on the back for the output shaft on it. So they knew the engine was heavy. So Gordon and Leo designed a transaxle, so they wanted to spread the weight out as much as they could. So it had a transaxle in it and a DDO and rear end. So he said, yeah, we did all the design work and we could cut all the gears and everything at Samson Motors, but the ring and pinion we couldn't make. So I made the drawing, or the ring and pinion, and sent it to Double Diamond. And 2-3 weeks later, they show up and they were like $30 a piece.
Jeez.
Which nowadays I've had, you know, customers, when we did a lot, and I had the shop and we did a lot of specialized gear cutting and everything, and like, no, ring and pinions are a whole different world.
Yeah.
That's not, you go there. And I mean, to do a ring and pinion, a specialty ring and pinion nowadays is $10,000 to $20,000 and a 6 months, 8-year lead time. You know,
isn't that crazy?
Yeah, and it was so different then. You know, just like, yeah, just do this, yeah, whatever. Yeah.
And whatever became of that engine, is it still live somewhere?
It's actually the complete cars in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's got a neat history.
Yeah, yeah. And he actually owned the car, so that was part of when he got all the Samson stuff. He got that car, and it became the Spike Jones Special in this livery. And Sam Hanks drove it in 1946 and qualified 3rd.
Wow.
At the 500, so they were outside the front row. But they had an oiling issue. It wasn't scavenging, I don't know, a pinch line or something. So at the start of the race, it wasn't running that great, and then it started smoking really bad because it had filled up the crankcase with oil, so they had to pull in.
Oh, shoot.
But he did qualify 3rd, so, which was pretty
cool.
impressive.
And
yeah.
a neat car. And,
Yeah.
and Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. Oh gosh, I lost the question I was going to ask you next, but so as far as racing goes, how did your dad feel about you getting behind the wheel and actually competing in races? Having lost friends racing, was he somewhat?
Well, they were fine because now the cars obviously became a lot safer with roll cages. If it wasn't for roll cages, I probably wouldn't be sitting here now, I can think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's going back to Sam Hanks. That was, to me, was one of the most, with the hundreds of races he won, he never got upside down in a midget.
That's unbelievable.
That is unbelievable. The only time he got upside down in a car was an Indy car, and the thing broke a connecting rod, and so when they did it, on an offie, it'd snap at the top end, and it'd come around and jam between the blocks, so it'd lock the engine up.
Oh.
And so he said it broke like halfway down the straightaway at Indy, and all of a sudden he said, I'm keeping it off the wall, it's sliding, and he said, I'm standing up in the son of a bitch, and I got the thing, and he broke the handle on the in and out of the transmission trying to get it out of gear, and the thing slid off into the infield, and it had rained, and it rained, and it dumped up on its side and threw him out, and
wow.
he spent a couple days in the hospital, just beat him up a little bit, but that was the only time he ever.
Isn't that
which is
fascinating?
incredible for
Unbelievable. And I'm glad you mentioned Sam Hanks, because that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about is, obviously, we have a good relationship with Alice Hanks because of you, and Sam's history is so fascinating. And what are your best memories of Sam Hanks just as a guy coming around? Was he a pretty easy guy to get along
yeah, he
with?
was incredible. Yeah, I mean, just really, I don't want to say low key, but not boisterous or whatever. He just let his actions speak for themselves and whatever, and probably used to go to the races, all the time, and talk to you after the races. It's like, that looked good. Maybe do this a little bit. You kind of, still give you some advice.
Getting advice from Sam Hanks,
which was pretty cool. And one time I got a little over enthusiastic, maybe, and one of his best advice, he goes, "There's always another race. Don't bust your ass."
That's cool. Be patient.
Yeah.
Wow, what a great guy. And when it doesn't take long talking to Alice to realize what a gentleman he was in those days. And I think now you think about racers as kind of like this fringe culture, but those guys were really a class act. Just all the way.
Yeah, no, Sam was incredible, and obviously Tony Holman Sr., Mr. Holman, which Sam, after he retired, he became director of competition at Indianapolis Motor Speedway for a lot of years and whatever. It was, it was just different the way things were run. I mean, race teams were like 3 or 4 people, not hundreds, and you fabricated stuff. You didn't buy everything, and it was everything you could design and build and try and outsmart the guy instead of just opening the bubble wrap and bolting it on. So it's a different world.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you miss competitive racing? If you could go back and do it again, would you hop in the seat?
Yeah, if you could just make sure you didn't crash. The racing's great. Yeah, it hurts. Yeah, it hurt more the older you get. I still remember a few of them. That must have been Oildale or something. So I mean, it was always fun. It was hard to, it's such a passion or whatever. That's all you did. I mean, when I raced, I didn't water ski, I didn't snow ski, we raced. That was what you do,
That was your focus.
Yeah. And I was fortunate enough to go through Sleepy Trip, whatever. I went, 1983, I went to New Zealand and raced for like 2 months.
Wow, how cool.
That was, an incredible experience. And at that time, New Zealand was still, they hadn't really discovered tourists yet or whatever. It was still an agricultural-based country and everything. So, that was, my brother came down part way through, spent a couple weeks, and it's like, anything I need to bring some salad dressing. At that time, mayonnaise was the only salad dressing you could get. It's like, really? Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. So, but just I need to run 4 or 5 nights a week. I mean, it was, so that's how you got to be good. I mean, you could see.
Just the repetition and living it.
Yeah, and you ran lots and lots of laps. I mean, it's every promoter here should be made to go to New Zealand and see how they run the show. The Western Springs track is right in the middle of Auckland, which is their largest city, and beautiful facility. When you'd get there, the pits are paved, everybody had a spot. A program comes out, and they ran 3/4 midgets, sprint cars, the side chairs, and maybe one other, sometimes speedway bikes, but usually at least a 4 deal. And there's no hot laps, there's no qualifying, there's handicappers for the event. So when you get there, you open the program, okay, race 1 is here, and here's the lineup. And then you race in 1, race 6, you know your lineup, and it's like this one starts at 7:45, race 2 starts at here. And I mean, when you'd race, there was 2 pit gates on the straightaway, and when you took the checkered flag, you came around, you didn't make a cool down lap, you got stopped because they're pushing the next event out the other gate.
That's,
you know, I mean, it was
interesting.
And I mean, it was incredible. They'd have 25,000 people there at a 1/4 mile dirt track. It's like you'd push out like, whoa.
Feel like you're really,
Yeah.
you're in the arena.
Yeah, you're in the arena. It's
You're a
like,
gladiator.
Yeah. And the handicappers, you tried to be nice and buy them beers, but you know, because they'd always start you in the back. You know, it's like, you're good. We brought you over here. You're starting in the back. You know.
Yeah, that's right. It's like, thanks.
Yeah. And Sleepy was a great coach because he goes, yeah, when they start you back, he says, but you can drop back farther. So he says everybody else will be running like starting speed. And he says you got to get 3 or 4 guys on the first lap, and then you got a chance. You know. So yeah. So Sleepy was a great coach and helping race like that and whatever. So
that's really, really cool. Today, is there something on your bucket list to do with cars or racing? Is there that next car that you'd love to get your hands on?
I'm only 1 car away from eternal happiness. You just don't know which one it is, but yeah.
That's funny.
No, I just, you know, we've been really fortunate. I mean, we've shown done a little bit of vintage racing. More display. I won't say racing because I don't like to see the historic cars get torn up or over abused. I mean, they need to get out and exercise, but not abused or
burn
whatever.
The tires off of
burn
them.
the tires off of them. We've been fortunate of a show. We've got a 1935 2-man. It's a wriggling chassis, but all Miller running gear that we've shown at Pebble Beach, and actually
That's a
won
cool car. Yeah.
won with that. And the Blakely car we've shown and done well with it, and then run it at the vintage events at Indy and whatever. So you're still involved, so that helps. Not competitive racing, but you still get out and see the people. I mean, the people are as much, you know, involved with it as actually doing it, as having a beer and telling them how fast you used to be and whatever.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
I think that's one thing I've learned with the museum. I think when you first come to work for a museum, you really notice all the stuff, but it's really, you know, the human story behind everything that people are interested in. And, you know, as I got to know you, I mean, I never look at a Schroeder Steering Box the same way because I know the history of it and I know what it took to kind of get there. So that's what I love about it. And I got to say, it's really awesome having you here, and I'm constantly pinching myself because here we are talking to a guy that's got his fingers involved in NASCAR and Indy and all these things that, you know, kind of make up our whole world of racing, and not many people can say that. I think that's pretty phenomenal, and to be able to consider you a friend and a friend of our museum. We're just always so tickled when you stop by and you can teach us a little bit, because you always do. I mean, it never fails. You walk in the door and it's like, let me tell you about this, and all of a sudden I've learned my new thing for the day. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to get on tape? Because boy, we just love having all this history.
I mean, we could go on for days, I'm sure, but it's been a good run, or it's great, and we always enjoy coming here and seeing the new stuff coming in and trying to help support it by finding stuff for you. If I hear of somebody's stuff, I mean, let you know. So, hey, I don't know if you saw this, it's available. So-and-so selling something. You guys interested?
We always love that,
Yeah.
And I should mention that your wife Karen's here with us. She's just sitting right over behind the camera, and she also blows me away, because if there's a name that you can't remember, she's like that, like right on it, and knows her racing history about as good as anybody I've ever met. And you two are such a great couple and such a great friends, and it's always good to see.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, it's great because I'm obviously more on the mechanical side, and she appreciates the history
Yeah.
side of things stuff. So she enjoys doing the research on the cars, trying to find out what races, who did what. And
Oh yeah, and
whatever.
a big part of the business too.
Yeah.
You know,
When we had the business, she ran the office and I ran the shop.
Sure, not an easy task.
No,
I mean,
it worked out okay. Yeah,
it's,
yeah. Yeah, she didn't. We had a deal. She didn't tell me how to make parts, and I didn't tell her how to run the office. So,
I
yeah.
like that. My
Yeah.
wife and I have a similar deal,
Yeah.
just on a lesser scale.
yeah. That's how it works.
Oh, that's fun. Well, Gary, this has been a real honor, and I hope we're doing this many years to come, and
Yeah.
you can keep teaching us young guys about all this wonderful history. And,
No, thank you.
well, and we hope to have you back soon. And
Yeah.
from everybody listening, thanks for joining us here at the Museum of American Speed. Always great to have a wonderful guest like Gary, and we hope we'll see you again next time.